Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the next episode of Love It or Hate It. And today, I'm looking at the game Ashen. It is on PC and on Xbox. It is not available on PlayStation at this time. I believe it is an Xbox exclusive. They've been touting it as such. It is arguably a budget title. Anything below $60 is, I guess, considered a budget title. And since this game comes in at $40, that qualifies. So, let's talk a little bit about Ashen while I watch this person blow up their room, which I'm not sure how that really accomplished, but still. So, if you are into games like Dark Souls, or Demon Souls, or Neo on PlayStation, or games like Lords of the Fallen, or The Surge, any of those Souls or Souls-like games, Bloodborne, great example there too, you will definitely love Ashen. Its combat system feels literally copy-pasted right out of Dark Souls with light attacks, heavy attacks, turtling behind shields. There are some things missing that hardcore Souls players will notice, like the lack of a parry system, that sort of thing, but it's sort of like a simplified version of Dark Souls combat, but it works really, really well. When companies out there are releasing games that simply don't work and we're paying $60 for them, it's nice to see somebody release a $40 game that actually works perfectly. And I have had no issues with it working at all. I've had no glitching or anything when it's very responsive. So as far as that goes, if you are a fan of Dark Souls or that type of third-person action game, one with challenge, which this definitely has, then you are going to love Ashen. Overall, it is in a fantasy world, and unlike Dark Souls or Bloodborne or most From Software games, it is not as depressing. Although, and I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm just saying that in the case of Souls, you're living in a world that's coming to an end. In the case of Bloodborne, you feel like you're living in a world that's coming to an end. This one, it's already had its end, and it's returning to a cycle of life. And so there is that glimmer of hope you don't see in those other games. And so that kind of leads itself into the art style. And although right now the scenes you're seeing are not really demonstrating this, because it is more of a nighttime scene in a darker area, generally speaking, it's a much more richer color palette. And even though the art is very stylized, it's very stripped down, it's very minimalist, it is still really, really excellent. Some have complained because your character and any of the characters in the game don't, for lack of a term, have faces. You can't see a mouth or a nose or eyes or anything like that. The idea is very deliberate. It's the idea that you aren't necessarily some chosen one, in the traditional sense. You're just a guy that happened to be there and are there to help. And that's what's really cool about it. In some ways, it is about your character finding identity. And in the scene you're seeing now, I'm trying to find a way if I could get up on top of that, but that didn't work. So, overall, I'd have to say, as far as gameplay itself, because it's so Souls-like, I would have to say I love that. World design. In any game like Souls, or any third-person action game, world design goes into it a lot. And I would say the world design is really good. It's not up to the level of the original Dark Souls, but then again, what is? I would say it's not up to Bloodborne standards, but it's definitely better than, say, Demon Souls was, or, others like Lords of the Fallen. I think the world is put together quite well. It's not absolutely massive, but it's pretty darn big. There's not a huge variety of enemies, but there is enough of a variety. I feel like it is a living, breathing world to a degree, with characters and motivations and things like that. So in that regard, it's great. The gameplay is great, the design there is great, the art's great. Overall, I have very little negative to say. I think the way things are rolled out throughout the game as you unlock different abilities and skills, I think that's pretty much on par with where it needs to be. There is one complaint I have to make here that is a pretty important one. I do think that the difficulty scaling does need some work. There is a part in the game, I would say building up to the halfway point, where there's a really sudden difficulty spike, and it's way more of a difficulty spike than you would expect at that point, and then it just drops back down to being relatively easy again, and until you have a couple more moments like that, but there are much easier transitions. That first one is difficult on a level that I was really surprised by. I think that, you know, if they were to ever make a sequel to this game, that's one thing they would need to work on, is areas like, and I'm looking at you, Seat of the Matriarch, where you need to have at least one more like a ritual stone where I can save. It's like a bonfire. You need one more of those, like say halfway through or something. Maybe that might make it a little too easy, but there needs to be something. Or maybe unlockable shortcuts like from the Dark Souls and Bloodborne method. There is a shortcut there, but it's there the whole time. If you know it's there, you can just take it. But it's not something you would ever really look at and consider. Overall, the boss fights. Let's talk about those as you're watching one now. Matter of fact, meet Matriarch. So the boss fights are overall, they're not up to the level of the Soul series or Bloodborne, but they are not bad. I would say this is the first boss fight here, the third one that you're watching now, where there is some sort of a strategy you have to do. Or I don't want to say a gimmick, it's not really a gimmick, but you have to, you know, certain events have to happen before you can really hurt this boss. And so that's probably the first time it does that, and it does that throughout the rest of the game with the following bosses, and like where it adds in these stages and things like that. The first couple are more like simplified to kind of teach you how to use it, but it's very well put together. I think the boss fights are great. If you are hungry for a Souls-like game, and you know you have a couple months to wait till Sekiro Shadows Die Twice comes out, then I've got to tell you, this is a great buy. I would have to say that one consideration is it feeds that Souls itch that many of us who are into that style of game have. Because the controls are so fluid, it almost does feel like I'm playing maybe the original Dark Souls or Demon Souls, just with a few things missing, like the parrying, or obviously weapon arts and things like that. There isn't as much weapon variety. That would be a complaint. But the entire game, you have a co-op partner with you, but it isn't an actual player online necessarily. Usually it's computer controlled, but sometimes a player online will end up being your computer controlled person, and you won't know. So like right now, the Jokal, my guy that's fighting with me, is over there fighting, and I have no idea if that's Jokal, the NPC, or if that's an actual player playing as Jokal. I have no way of knowing. I'm going to guess it was because they're NPC, because I didn't see anything that demonstrated a difference in playstyle, but I can't guarantee that. I don't know. But that does kind of make it interesting. So that I did have a few issues here and there where somebody would clearly be using my NPC because they'd wander off and do God knows what while I'm trying to accomplish a task. But, you know, that is a complaint, but it's not a huge one. In the end, you know, if you want something Souls-like, if you want something that scratches that itch for the couple months we have to wait until Sekiro comes out, and if you don't feel like, you know, playing Bloodborne New Game +4 or anything like that, then this would be a great choice. It is the great art style. It's unique. The story's actually pretty good. It is a little murky, but if you're a Dark Souls fan, you know murky. I mean, let's be honest, you know murky, and I would say this is a little more directly told than Dark Souls stories usually are. That being said, it's a pretty good story, and overall it's a really, really fun game. It's a great experience, and I think you would enjoy it. If you are not into those type of games, I would encourage you to give it a try. It's budget price. If you can't just get a hold of, say, the original Dark Souls, even backwards compat on 360, you can play it on Xbox One. But I will say these types of games are just fantastic and they're fun. So I've had a few negatives. I've had a lot of positives. I think this one's almost a no-brainer. But let's just be honest here. Whenever I look at this game, my verdict is I love it. I think it is great for $40. I think it is absolutely worth it. So I would say the verdict is love it. If you're willing to spend $40 on this thing, get it. You will absolutely not be sad.